Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah means something that is revealed from a secret, something that is unfolding from a secret place. The great Christian mystic Stylianos Ateshlis, better known as Daskalos, said that the origins of the Kabbalah go back very far in ancient times. We know that many indigenous tribes from all over the world talk about the tree of life, and that this great tree that connects heaven and earth is an expression of Kabbalah. Heaven and earth have many stories, many secrets to be told to those who look deeper. In ancient Egypt, the Kabbalah existed in a similar form as it does today, with the exception that each of the sephira, circles that are in the Kabbalah figure, contain animal spirits or animal powers. Later, in the 2nd and 3rd century after Christ, the Kabbalah began to take the form of a Gnostic Christian Kabbalah, and the form of the tree of life that Daskalos was teaching, called the symbol of life, arose around the 3rd century through the work of the Bishop of Alexandria called Origen. The Gnostic Christian Kabbalah arose out of the Sophian teachings of Gnostic Christianity, early Christianity, which included the more mystical Gospels that were not a part of the Bible as it is today. For example, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Apocrypha of Philip. And this is the form of Kabbalah that I am more formally working with now. The roots of Kabbalah extend in many esoteric practices. Even the book of St. John's Revelation, or the Apocalypse, book of the Apocalypse, as we call it, has its origins in the Kabbalah. Now, the Jewish Kabbalah also existed simultaneously with the early Christian Kabbalah and the Egyptian Tree of Life. Then later, in the spiritual, mystical side of Islam, Kabbalah emerged as a figure we call the Enneagram. That is a 9-pointed star within a circle that also contains all the sephira circles that the Kabbalah does. As we said, the word Kabbalah means that which will reveal itself, that which is secret and reveals. This is also the meaning of the word apocalypse. We think of the word in modern times of apocalypse to mean something disastrous or, terrible happening. From the original Greek, apokalypsos meant that which is hidden or secret that is revealed, the same as the meaning of Kabbalah. So there is a very strong link, and in ancient Greece, the original word for apocalypse was epopteia, which means a seer or someone who sees into the secret nature of life, an initiate of spirit. And we can see that all these expressions are coming from the same source, inner teachings. Now, the use of the Kabbalah was mainly in 3 different ways. It was used as a magical system. It was used as a way to manifest things more for material gains and benefits. In these first 2 areas, there's a great connection to the nature of alchemy. Then the Kabbalah was also used for contemplative, meditative practices to find God. When we look at the figure of the Kabbalah, we see that it contains 3 columns, one left, one middle, and one to the right. Connecting these columns, through these columns, are circles. 9 circles and a triangle at the top. In Kabbalah, we call these pillars, and they have a significance. The left-hand pillar is called the pillar of consequence, or basically karma, but it also represents creation in form, that's bounded by form, manifestations. The right-hand pillar represents the blessings, that which is given freely, life source energy. The middle pillar, often called the pillar of compassion, is an ascension pillar of energy through which we grow in our awareness as we become Christed. I'm going to pull out a picture of Kabbalah from the book. so that you can see it. Each of the circles within the columns we call sephira. Sephira are, what the meaning of sephira are doorways to higher consciousness, doorways. They are domains of consciousness, different activity. Let's name them and let's talk a little bit about them. The sephira at the bottom of the figure, and this is MALCHUTH, which means foundation, and it represents the earth. Then we have the next sephira, YESOD. This has to do with emotions and desires. Then we have two sephira, right and left, above YESOD. Yes. On the left side we have NEZACH, left is HOD. NEZACH is the sephira that is said to mean victory, beauty, inspiration, it's deep feelings. HOD has to do with logic, thought, communication. These three sephira, YESOD, NEZACH, and HOD, are referred as the action triad. It basically means that the location on the body, if we think of the Kabbalah on the body, would represent the pelvic chakra, YESOD, the solar plexus chakra, NEZACH, and HOD. We could say, in a practical sense, YESOD would represent our motivation, our desire. NEZACH, the inspiration and feelings we get from higher consciousness to do so. And HOD, the thoughts, our thinking, our beliefs, our attitudes that can draw the energy down into form. So we have feeling, thought, desire, and eventually manifestation in the world. This is the manifesting. The mystic Stylianos Oteshlis, or Daskalos, had said that when we combine our thoughts and emotions with a deep intention, we create elementals. If the inspiration for our elementals is coming from higher consciousness, a higher feeling of divine love and a higher feeling of wisdom, then what we create in the world is of a reflection of the divine plan and the gifts that we're given to share with life. On the other hand, we've lost our connection to the divine. Our ego turns itself toward the physical world alone and toward our emotions and thoughts separated from the higher consciousness. Have a tendency to create very negative elementals based on these vices such as anger, greed, lust, envy, the 9 vices. So this action triad is used in a negative way to separate us even further from our source. In the Kabbalah, the goal would be ascension, or raising our consciousness to the divine. Spiritual use of the Kabbalah, the meditative, contemplative Kabbalah. We place our teachings primarily on awaken the soul. So as we continue, we have the next sephira, which is TIPHERETH. TIPHERETH relates to beauty and love. It's said to be the center of the Christ heart. As you can see, TIPHERETH connects to all the different sephira, or doorways. Since it does, the real core of any spiritual teaching should be about heart, should be about love, divine love. Through TIPHERETH, we can know all states of consciousness. And through TIPHERETH, we can make our way back home to our source in consciousness. Above TIPHERETH, we have 2 sephira, CHESED and DIN. CHESED, the word means blessings, grace, and DIN represents form that is limited or bound. When we take these 3 centers, TIPHERETH, CHESED, and DIN, this is called a moral triad, or the ethical triad. The best way I can describe the function of this grouping of 3 sephira is in reference to a lot of the miracles and healings that Jesus did in the Bible. Quite often in the accounts, Jesus would meet someone that needed healing. He would know their name and he would point out their weaknesses. The karma here, DIN, it holds the cause and effect relations, or karma, of the individual. He would feel his compassion, his love. TIPHERETH also represents forgiveness. Quite often say, you are forgiven for your sins. DIN means your sins, your karma. Receive the blessings. He would touch them or look at them. Sometimes directly with them, or even at a distance, he would heal. This represents grace or blessings, Hesed. And so by doing this, he would help them connect the action triad, the lower sephira, with the higher sephira. In Christian Gnostic Kabbalah, this is also reflected in the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. It's said that when Jesus was baptized by St. John the Baptist, at that very moment, Mary Magdalene, who had lived up to that point a very materialistically oriented life, she began to wake up. Her soul began to wake up to the desire to meet Jesus and to go another way in life. The way of understanding this is that Mary Magdalene at that point in her life was in MALCHUTH, or the earth, and that perhaps had been using her thoughts and emotions and her intentions toward lower consciousness, because that's how she had been raised. St. John connected Jesus, who was also in a physical body, to his Christ heart here in TIPHERETH. And from this point in TIPHERETH, when Mary Magdalene met him, he raised her to the same place in the Christ heart by releasing her of a lot of these elementals that were holding or binding her to the lower consciousness, forming a link between MALCHUTH and TIPHERETH through YESOD, or emotions, or passions and feelings. So in these stories, there are great truths that reflect also the divisions we experience within our own consciousness, both male, female, higher, lower,
Ezekben a történetekben
and how we need to work to heal these, to bring harmony to our beings again, become holistic beings again. Then we have another sephira, which is often referred to as the secret sephira, sometimes referred to as the void. This represents the origins of the mind, the two great streams of the mind, positive and negative, the origin of our polarity that we live in our existences. And so in a sense it represents both the brightness of cosmic knowledge and awareness, on the other side cosmic illusion and ignorance, the negative pole. As long as we are in the world and we are holding a mental consciousness, we are always having to transform and rebalance ourselves in these two polar energies. So one way of looking at this would be if you wanted to climb a mountain. When you're looking up the mountain, you're looking at something at a great distance that you want to attain or reach. And your journey up the mountain is often arduous. Sometimes you're in pain, sometimes you're in joy from the journey. You learn a lot from this experience, and as you reach the top, you find yourself in a new space or a new state. From the top of the mountain, if you're looking down, you have a view of everything. You're in a state of wholeness. You view everything as below, but also as a part of you. So one way of saying this is that if you are looking from your home in God's light, everything below looks in oneness, and there's no issue of conflict about whether it's positive or negative, because you're outside of that domain of the mind. This is soul awareness. It's an awareness that all things are part of you and they're part of the oneness of God. But when we step into this stream, this river that breaks into two rivers, we find ourselves in a world of polarity, and we have to balance that polarity constantly in ourselves. But this is not a punishment for us, as you might think. If you know, in the early biblical account of the Garden of Eden, we're talking about that state of oneness of the soul, and then suddenly you're out of it and you're split and you're suffering. You're at fault. In truth, that's part of the divine plan. That's how we individuate and we become conscious of ourselves as divine beings. So in this journey we continue up and we find ourselves in the higher triad, which is called sometimes the triad of light, or the supernal triad, right here. The supernal, the super triad, the triad of light. And in this triad we have Chokmah, Bina, and Keter. Now Chokmah represents divine blessings and grace and the eternal light of God, the wisdom, the great wisdom. Father God, in this case. Bina, Mother God, Divine Mother. Also the source of creation and the binding of spirit or God's light into form. Yeah? And In this state, the supernal triad, we call it, there is a oneness, there is no duality. We can't speak of lightness and dark, we can speak of just pure consciousness. Keter is what we call potential, that we cannot know the Godhead within our minds, but we have to know it in higher states of awareness. One of the reasons it's very difficult to talk about higher spiritual realities within our minds and our bodies is that we are limited in our understanding. But as Dasklos had pointed out, that if we learn that we are in fact soul, that we are divine in our origins, and we can begin to experience and care for our mind, our emotions, our physical bodies as sacred vehicles through which we can know life. We could say that one of the functions of Kabbalah is not to escape from life, but to embrace life in its fullness. Another aspect of Kabbalah that I think is very interesting for people to understand. As you'll notice, all these sephira are in a unity. They are all connected. They're not separated from each other. In a manner of speaking, this would also represent that within our physical bodies, right in this moment, in our lives, we have access to all the subtle energies within each of the sephira. It means that we are complete in this moment, as we are. So that there's really no place to go. Life is not about escaping to some high mountain retreat and staying there while the world falls apart. It's about being fully present in your life and living in the awareness of all the subtle states of consciousness that you have access to. That's your birthright. So like we said, from the standpoint of heaven, you're not having to walk all the way up the mountain to understand anything. But if you believe you're living in separation from your source or yourself, you feel like you have a long way to go to reach something better. And that strong desire, if it's not on finding your wholeness, it ends up going into addiction consciousness, which is quite the opposite, which separating and fragmenting yourself even more. One of the teachings of Kabbalah is that there was a time when the higher triad we spoke of, the Divine Mother, was in union with her children. The children would be the seven sephira below: Din, Chesed, TIPHERETH, Hod, NEZACH, Yesod, and MALCHUTH. And that was a time, some called it the time of the Garden of Eden, or even far before the historical notion of the Garden of Eden, which might have taken place in the Black Sea, this event of flooding, even before, as a great maritime civilization around 12,000 years ago, 12 to 14,000 years ago. And there's geological evidence on our planet that at that time, around 14,000 years ago, there was a great cataclysm that took place that created a great trauma in the human species, that created a mistrust of Mother Earth and nature, threw the world into a big chaos and a survivalist mentality in humanity. That mentality eventually grew a very strong, isolated ego, a disconnection from the true values of the earth, led to a very extreme patriarchal period of our history, which has developed technology at the expense of values, human values. And that this process represents, is what we say in Kabbalah, the fragmentation of Bina from the Sephira below. So this great trauma in psychiatry, we call this post-traumatic stress. And we are speaking now of it on a very collective level, almost a biological, genetic level. Yeah, you know, even other species on our planet, there are places where certain animals felt very comfortable with humans being around until they were being killed, and then suddenly they developed fear and threat and aggression toward humans. The post-traumatic stress oftentimes recurs as an event where one associates with the original trauma because of something and then enacts it again. even in the course of wars being one of the major expressions of this. And one could even say that we have created a memory of this original event when we send bombs out, which were originally meteorites hitting the earth, and now they're our own bombs and own, destructions, destructive tendencies. So now, of course, we're living in the emergence of a new age where we're hoping that we can begin to heal this fragmentation. And I think Kabbalah is one way to begin that process. Also, there is some evidence that perhaps after this great cataclysm, even the position of the Earth changed, where it became tilted 23.5 degrees. Yeah? So that even the seasons developed after this time. Before then, it was thought that there was a perpetual spring. So the notion that the Earth may have well tilted as a result of these major cataclysms seems to be confirmed through many, many traditions that have rituals that were focused on actually healing this kind of fragmentation. For example, in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, the pyramids of Giza, the Great Pyramid, are said to be located in one of the most stable points in the earth. One ceremony that the pharaohs were engaged in, one ritual, the Djed ceremony, involved them doing a ceremony in which there was a kind of pillar, which we could see represents the middle pillar of the Kabbalah, is tilted and at around a 23.5 degree angle. And by the end of the ceremony, the pillar is put upright to represent the healing of what they call Zeptepi. Zeptepi, which meant the earth before the beginning of time. So in a way, they understood through their oral traditions passed down for many, many, many generations, the importance of restoring this original state of wholeness within themselves for their societies, for their people, their cultures. Perhaps our task today within ourselves to restore our own inner wholeness, to allow that awareness to be brought back to the earth. So I feel very strongly that a meditative, contemplative study of the Kabbalah can help us to reestablish this inner wholeness. And just a few more words. There's a lot on Kabbalah. We are working with 7 courses in Kabbalah in the Etherico school. There's not only one Kabbalah, but we could say there are several Kabbahas. There's the physical Kabbalah, referred to as Asiya, which actually its root comes from the word Asia, or Asha. Then we have the second Kabbalah is more the emotions and the feeling level, which is Yetzirah. A Kabbalah that represents the world of our thoughts, the mental body, which is Beria. Kabbalah that represents the awareness of the soul's emanation of light, which is called Atzil. Then the fifth Kabbalah, the fifth universe, would be Adam Kadmon, which represents the primal human, or the state of potential, God potential, which is a great mystery that we're always striving to know and to grow toward. So there are many areas of Kabbalah, but these are just a few things I share. There are angels and archangels and the different sephra to be learned about, and different healing techniques as well. And in the most recent book that I have put out called The Hidden Code of Revelation, this is the interpretation of St. John's Book of Revelation for the Bible as a Kabbalistic journey, study of Kabbalah at different levels. So thank you for your attentiveness and your time. Happy trails to everyone.